You're listening to The Dan Nicholl Show.
My guest on the Dan Nicholl Show this week is somebody I haven't seen in person for, must be more than 2 decades. Annoyingly, she does not look a minute older than the last time I saw her. But I feel like I see her all the time, as will most of you, because she graces our television screens on a weekly basis and is something of a superstar. I think Christine Amanpour, but way younger, way cooler, and I think way more successful. And an old colleague of mine, Annika Larsen. It is wonderful to have you with us.
Dan, it's been so long, and you look exactly the same.
Well, it's completely untrue, but very kind, and thank you. It goes back, it's kind of 25 years now almost. When I think
Really
we
giving out
started
inches
out.
away, aren't you?
Well, we were both child prodigies.
We're under the mantle of Martin Gillingham, I would say.
Martin Gillingham and then
Mike Wills, John
Martin
Newsom,
Bailey I started
Martin
with.
Bailey, The Breakfast Show.
Indeed. In fact, you probably don't know this. I was at UCT Radio creating the kind of radio that would have me certainly cancelled and probably in jail where I'd be doing it today. And UCT Radio got a phone call and asked if there was anybody who could come out and audition. And they packed me off on a Wednesday afternoon to go and audition for what I thought was possibly doing backup for the 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. show on a Monday in months to come. And the next morning I was on Martin Bailey's breakfast show doing the sport, and thus began my career. Having to interact with people who actually knew what they were doing on radio, yourself very much being one of them, because at that stage you were this young, cool news hound, and Cape Talk was the place to go.
I was so uncool. But we were very committed, weren't we? I mean, if I think back, we worked ridiculous hours. This sounds like a very rude question, but
What did I
full
actually do?
disclosure. What did you earn a month?
What did I earn a month? They used to give me a handful of coins and a voucher for the local engine quick
For
stop.
the vending machine, which didn't work, which we kicked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'm very good because it was by shift.
Yeah,
And I
you guys
think
were on
if
shift.
it was a really, really good month and maybe the afternoon sport guy was away and I'd covered 2 shifts in a day, I could ratchet up to almost 4,000 rand a month.
Oh my word, you were earning way more than me. It's just wrong on every level.
I agree completely.
I was on 2,000 Rand a month, and I was working like 13 hours a day, and I was dealing with PAGAD and organized crime.
And I was watching sport off the TV and waltzing in every half hour to give some updates on the football.
Were you around during 9/11?
I hadn't quite started then. In fact, I had, and I remember being very annoyed, and this reflects poorly on me. My chief annoyance with 9/11 was that I had a show planned because I was standing in for Martin Gillingham on his sports show that night, and it was going to be my big break. And it got cancelled because something had happened in America that they wanted to cover. And then I saw it on TV and realized that it probably did have greater consequence than my interview with Robbie Fleck. That was
He was
kind
a
of
big
just as
hero
I
at
was
the
starting.
time too. He was a big deal at the time.
It
And Bob
was.
Skinstad.
Yeah, those were halcyon days for us
They
in
were.
Cape. How did you get into the space that you did?
What, Cape Talk?
Yeah.
I remember trying desperately to get into radio, and so I went to the SABC, and they didn't have any jobs. So I went to Nigel Murphy's Microphone-In. I don't know if you ever remember that. You're probably too young. Anyway,
Way too young.
and it was a phone-in show, and I used to take the calls. And then they felt sorry for me, and I got a job at Fair Lady magazine as an editorial assistant. But they said I had to know how to type. So I had to type all the rejection letters and reject copy, which, I mean, brilliant authors now that I can't believe I was just, tossing aside. It's embarrassing to think about.
Did you ever work with or for Catherine Eden?
So Kathy was my boss, and if it weren't for her, I would be, I don't know what I would be doing actually. She was the dreamiest person in the whole wide world.
Well, I can tell you she still is because she is my aunt.
Oh my word, it's such a small world. Well, Kathy, and Ellen, I don't know if you remember Ellen, but anyway, they were 2 editors at the time, and I was their assistant. And they discovered very early on that I could not type, never mind work a computer. I mean, people at that stage were smoking in the office. It was that long ago. So they sent me on a typing course, but I found it very, very dull. So I couldn't do that either. So they should have fired me, but they didn't have the heart to do it. So I used to just make myself utterly indisposable. So in the mornings, I would get there at 7:00. This is a trick for anyone listening. I'd get there at 7:00 because they would come in 8:30, and I would get them croissants, and I use my money for the month, get them croissants and a coffee, and I would be waiting there. How can you fire someone who does that? It's just impossible, right? So that's how I kept a job. And then I decided I'd like to go into news, and I applied for a job at Cape Talk, and John Matham interviewed me, and he said, he'll deny this, but he said, "Do I intimidate you, Annika?" And I said, "No, should I be intimidated by you?" Anyway, he thought that was hilariously funny, and I got the job.
He
was
was he was a great person to work under. He could be
was.
he could have the foulest of moods,
Oh, God, he's always still so moody.
but he was a wonderful, wonderful man. And I think he was somebody you had to prove yourself to,
Yeah.
and he didn't suffer fools. And I think that's what makes him so brilliant on radio. And
He's amazing.
I think he's as good as anybody we have on South African radio.
He is.
And I admire him enormously. But he also, you had to be on your game, because he would call you up very quickly if you weren't performing as you
Absolutely.
should.
And Bruce Whitfield, I don't know if you worked with him
I
at all.
didn't work with Bruce. I know Bruce well, but I
Yeah.
didn't work with
Bruce
him.
was also wonderful. So there was, and John was the most wonderful mentor. I mean, he really took a lot of time and patience with the young ones. But I mean, there were a lot of really good people that were around at that time that came out of that station, actually, 702 too. I think we were really lucky.
It was a really cool era, not just for the people, but also for the medium, because it wasn't the stage, a time where we got all of our news updates from Instagram and from
Exactly.
X, and people were tuning in. People were tuning in to get the latest cricket score. Obviously, now you're on your Cricinfo app, and you've got it straight away, but they would be listening to get an update. Well, at Newlands, this is what's happening. And we were the real-time conduit for news then.
It's true. And that panic to get that story in, I mean, it was unbelievable. You had to get a story in as soon as possible with those massive cell phones, or find I remember Parliament, they still had those phone boxes. God, we sound so old. But
And then you'd get your typewriter out, and then you'd fax the copy through.
we did fax copy. But we had fun. That was the main thing. And we weren't politically correct. I mean, we had fun. We had a good time. The sports guys were incredibly vulgar.
I take exception to
I mean,
that.
they were really rude. I mean, they taught me a lot of very, very, very untoward things. But I thank them for it to this day. I don't think you were top of the pile in terms of being absolutely revolting. But
Well, there's an endorsement I've been
But they were-
dreaming of.
but we had fun. We had a good time.
We did, and I think it set us up for a lot of the things that we've gone on to do. For me, the journalistic ethos from that has led into doing things like this and having fun with really cool people, but doing so with a lot of knowledge and learning from where we are. For you, it's I mentioned the name Christine Amanpour at the top of the show, and that was only partly lighthearted, because you have created this really cool space for telling stories that can be quite difficult to tell, and doing so in a really balanced way. And balance is sadly not something we always have in the media anymore. And you've given us some of the definitive stories of the last few years. And I think in particular, and if the suddenly goes fuzzy and crackles, it means that we've been censored for information that's about to come out. But your interview with Andre de Ruyter that caused massive, massive ripples. Suddenly everybody knew who Annika Larsen was if they didn't already. It was a game changer in so many different ways. Tell me about that, as much as you can, as much as you're allowed to, how that
Yeah.
came about and what the impact was.
Look, I really think I underestimated the impact. But it's also so strange for me that it became such a pivotal interview, because I'd worked so hard in the run up to that, as I was telling you, the Pagad times, and then I'd been told to really shadow Jacob Zuma as soon as he was charged with corruption, which I think was in about 2005. So I'd spent a lot of time and it was tough reporting in Pietermaritzburg and KZN all that time. And I'd done so many crime stories, like awful stories of children being murdered, and really, at the Weinberg Sexual Offences Court and all that sort of thing. And then I met Andre de Ruyter, and all these, he'd been poisoned, and I thought, this is really strange. I mean, why isn't this front page news? I mean, anybody who's been poisoned with a cocktail of cyanide, and we don't know what else was in there, and he's a sort of captain of industry, whether you liked him or not, sort of odd. I mean, there's something more to the story. And then I heard that his brakes had been tampered with. Anyway, he was reluctant to do the interview, and I didn't realize at the time that there were two big news organizations who'd been working on forensic investigations with him for the past 6 months. I was unaware. I have a brilliant producer. I mean, she comes from the BBC, and she's just, I'm so lucky to have her. And I'm not just saying that to be all, rah-rah team. She is remarkable, and she's a little bit cleverer than me, I would say. In some aspects, which is good, right?
Comment withheld.
You surround yourself with people that are slightly smarter than you. That's the ideal,
It works for me. And
it works for me.
so.
It works for me. So, and just keeps you in check. Anyway, we did a lot of research and we did a lot of work on it, but I didn't think the interview would actually be aired in his lifetime. Let's put it that way. And
So this was an obituary piece.
it
for
was
one
almost
day.
like an obituary, which is why I probably didn't, I don't like that style of an aggressive interview, mainly because I've seen so many people walk off set, in those, when you're just constantly interrogating people in a very hyper assertive way. I just find you're not going to get the best out of them. So I sort of let them talk, and then I'm prepared enough to counter run around them a little bit if I need to. But he I felt was being genuine at the time. We did the interview late at night in somebody's house. There had to be a changeover of bodyguards. I've never really spoken about it before because I almost felt that I needed to protect his integrity. And yeah, we had these tapes, and he said, what I thought he said was not way more than I felt had been given in little bits and pieces by him previously. But I think the format, the medium of television, and the way you can put an interview together in terms of, we didn't edit it really, it was just top and tailed, made it very digestible of what was actually going on at Eskom. And I think it was the first time that somebody from the inside of any big SOE had the guts to actually speak out. And I think that's why it caused such waves. It's a pity that the messenger was shot, and rather than actually look at the problems, and of course there was so layered, there were so many moving parts, from the cartels to the mafia, etc., etc. I think he had a lot of interesting stuff to say, and I think it was, the way he was, paraded in front of Parliament and hung out to dry was unfair. Anyway, I didn't speak to him really again after that, and it was quite a scary time. It wasn't. I wouldn't say it was fun, but I'm glad that we did it.
What was it like personally dealing with the aftermath? Because particularly in the era of social media, people are generally not too shy to reach out and give you some constructive feedback.
Look, I tend to avoid X and Facebook. I go on Instagram and post photographs for the show often, or pretty stuff. It wasn't nice. And it probably wasn't too bad, but I'm quite sensitive. I shouldn't even be in this game, actually, to be quite honest. I'm quite a sensitive soul, and a lot of it was race related. It was sort of, I think I was called a white supremacist interviewing another white supremacist, that kind of stuff.
Look, you've always given off that vibe, in fairness.
I mean, really.
The
The
khaki outfit you're wearing at the moment.
I mean, I've got blonde hair. I mean, I've got Danish. I've born in Denmark. What can I say? But so some of that was hurtful, and I like to do a story because I really enjoy that part of my work. But I'd shot that sort of weeks before, if not months, quite a while before. Anyway, I can't remember the exact timelines. And I'd moved on from, as soon as something's shot and it's edited, I've moved on to something else. And I'm not the kind of journalist that likes to really make the story about me. I hate that, actually.
Yeah, I'm the complete opposite.
Yeah, I know you are. But I mean, I'm just a conduit. I am.
And you do that really well, and you do step back from it, and that gives the balance that your stories do. And I think that's why people hold you in the esteem that they do, and you're able to produce and have those kinds of conversations where people are happy to chat to you.
I think I'm quite, I wouldn't say, quite neutral, actually. I'm quite objective. I don't make decisions on people very easily until I've spent quite a lot of time with them. And people are nuanced. Nobody is. I've done so many criminal trials and etc. I was a legal reporter for a long time. For instance, I've never met a true psychopath, or maybe one or two, but usually just okay people tend to do bad things, like all of us, actually, really. So I don't form opinions of people, and I think that probably is why I tend to get people to agree to do the interviews. And I also think I just drive them insane. I can just go on and on and on and on until you just can't say no.
Oh, I mean, I got 82 emails from you to finally be on the Dan Nicholl show, and even I cracked in the end.
I'm so excited, but you were so polite and so kind, because we haven't seen each other for a long time.
We haven't indeed.
And you were very gracious to let me come onto the show, so thank you for that.
I have, of course, seen so much of you. The de Ruyter interview is the one that most people know, but there are so many others. And it's similar to when I have, say, my musician guests on, and I'll ask them, the gig we all know, or the album, or the song we all know, but is there a different one that is particularly special to them? If you look back at the myriad stories that you have done over the years, something like the de Ruyter one would go top of the list for most people because it is so high profile. But is there a particular story that you remember with fondness? It stood out. It wasn't maybe the biggest name or the biggest story, but there's just something really meaningful to what you were able to do with it.
I think we've got a program coming out on very soon that I've been working on for literally about 15 years, on an interview with Janusz Walus, the man who killed Chris Hani, who's been deported to Poland. He was deported a few weeks ago, and that's been a very long time coming, and was a difficult interview because he's the kind of person that doesn't like doing interviews, and he will not deviate from what he wants to answer. So that was tricky. But the one that I always think of, funny enough, is, I don't know if he prefers to be called, I think Hakiva, is Daimani, the rugby player. And
The man who famously wore his rugby kit for a week after the DHL Stormers won the URC Championship.
And it is such a strange one. I mean, that's from my guest tonight, is because I know very little about rugby, and I've interviewed quite a few. But he is the most remarkable person. You must know him.
I mean, he's got an incredible story.
His story
Nigerian
is
Jew shoe salesman rugby player.
crazy. I mean, put on a train at the age of, 6 years old, and then 8 years old, and brought up by his granny, and just this, the fact that he's able to completely upend all the stereotypes, first of all, with his nail polish and all that stuff, and his love of high fashion. That was one aspect of it, but he was just such a good storyteller, and his story was so genuine, and he was so authentic in that he said, every time I go out in the field, I know I've got to feed 10 people. And that struck home, and I just thought, wow, the pressure that this guy is under, but also just this absolute drive to succeed. I found it quite remarkable. I hope he writes a book one day, because I really think he's a wonderful human being, and I think that he's a brilliant player. And yeah, there's a lot about him that I thought was quite remarkable in his interview. So it's an outlier, but it's an interview that I think was really good.
It wasn't the one I was expecting, but I see why. He has a very authentic charm to him. It's not put upon. He's just really cool to spend time with.
Yeah, he is. And a lot of time with guests, I need to spend time making them feel relaxed and calm and in a space which you're very good at doing too.
You've got an entourage of 12 who are glaring at me as I speak to you.
Exactly. And I dare ask for some water. I mean, heaven help me. I mean, I got big
She
trouble.
has been in, my poor producer here, whose name I can never remember. I think it's Brad. The demands this woman has made. You have done all these amazing interviews, and you've been working in spaces that most people go out of their way to avoid. And I remember watching a documentary. I forget the guy's name. You will know it. He did a series on gangs around the world. Ross Kemp, I think it might have been.
Yes.
And he
Gangland. Yeah.
said with absolute certainty that it was Portsmouth Prison that was the scariest place he'd ever been to, because the gangsters of the Cape, there was just something in the eyes that truly frightened him. And this is a space that you've spent quite a bit of time in. What pulls you in there? What is the allure of that space for you?
I think that I've always been interested in the subversive, the underbelly. I'm not really interested in what everybody else finds easy to access. I like things that are a little bit strange and different. But Gangland, it was a show that did really, really well. We spent about 4 months in Manenberg, Belhar, Hanover Park, all sorts of areas with some of the top gangsters. And interestingly, it was the organized crime bosses that were more intimidating, I would say, than the actual gang guys. Because when you're out there in those areas, those hotspots, you get, I mean, I chose not to have bodyguards or any kind of security, because I thought people in that community, they have to live like that all the time. So I felt a little bit inauthentic. You do have to protect the equipment, because unlike when we were running around in those areas years ago, the equipment now is you'll just get shot for it easily. But what we did was we negotiated with the gang leaders ahead of time in a respectful manner and said, could we come into your precinct? Could we come and chat to you? So that was an agreement, and they kind of protected us in a way. And the only danger really was stray bullets, I would say. And I was thinking about, I was talking to journalists from the UK and the US. They would say, "Oh, do you have helmets and do you have protective gear on?" And I was like, "Of course not. No, we just don't do that here. It's just sort of expected that we'll be okay." Although if I'd asked for it from ET or NCA, they would have said yes, of course.
Were there any moments where it came close, where it got a little bit hairy?
Yeah, just from random shooting and stray bullets going off. There were 1 or 2 incidents, a little bit of intimidation.
Said so casually.
Well, I think while you're doing it, at the time it's you're working, so you're not going to be too bothered about, you're working. You know what it's like. You don't think about it until afterwards, right? At the time, it just seems like, I don't know. In times of great crisis, my blood pressure and everything powers down, and I am extremely calm. But if Dan Nicholl walks into the office and I say, "Hi Dan, how's your weekend?" and you go, "Ugh," I'll be like, "Oh my God, I've upset Dan. What have I done? This is awful. I don't know what to do. Should I go and talk to him?" I mean, it's mad.
I think in many ways, I look at the other show, the Dan Really Likes Wine show, and that's probably where there's a greater similarity. You have the occasional stray bullet to dodge, and sometimes the Pinot Noir I'm tasting is warm. And I think we have to understand that we have very similar challenges. I think from the
I
outside.
can't drink. I wish I could drink wine. Otherwise, I would tag along. But I
No,
can't.
that's a great.
So, not that I can't. I just feel really horrible if I drink alcohol. I don't know why. Anyway.
It's probably an odd number of glasses, so just have one more and you'll just be fine.
I wish.
When you're in these spaces from outside, gang spaces look pretty black and white. Well, if you're a gangster, you're doing bad things, you should be in jail. Everything is more nuanced than it initially seems.
Yeah.
How has your understanding of that space changed in terms of the gang dynamic and the people who form part of the community that is a gang?
Yeah. I mean, the one interesting sort of unifier that we found was that all of the people that we met in gangs, most of them are killed by the age of about 30, first of all, so they don't live very long, the male gangsters. The second one is that none of them have had a male father figure, which or any sort of figure of authority that they could trust and look up to. And the third thing is there is nobody to catch them when they fall. So if they play truant or they, I don't know, don't have something to take to school or whatever it is, there's no one there to say, come on, like you need to sort your stuff out and you need to go to school. There's just no one there. So the gang is a family. That's what it is. And it's about survival. And yes, there can be awful people, especially when they're on drugs and they can do awful things. She's not awful people. They're okay people who can do awful things. And I knew that they could turn on me as fast as they could be kind to me. But I also saw a little boy who was playing on the swings, and he was about 2, 3, and the swing, he walked in front of it and it clobbered him and he fell, and he was almost, I thought he would passed out actually before I could get to him. And he stood up and he bit his lip, and I could see he'd been told not to cry no matter what. And that for me said, okay, so that's where it all comes from. Just, you cannot show emotion, you cannot cry. It's just the way it is. And so it's a huge social problem. It's and it's really, really complex. So it's easy to, to sort of say awful things about people who live in part of gangs, but it is complicated, as you say.
It's a crazy city, this Cape Town.
Yeah. Oh, and the other thing was, sorry, Dan. I mean, it's hard for me to not stop talking.
I've noticed.
Sorry, I'm going to stop just now. But after episode 1 aired, 4 people who we'd interviewed or who'd featured in the show were dead. That's quite remarkable.
A horrible statistic.
So can you imagine? That just shows you. They were just people who'd been in a gang. They'd been in a fight.
It's a startling life. You have shone an incredible light on it, and I think you've given a lot more understanding of that world to so many of us. And you're going to continue to shine lights on all sorts of spaces. What are those spaces to come? If I were to say to you, right, you've got unlimited budget. I mean, you pretty much do anyway.
I don't. I have no budget.
You've got the opportunity to go and do the story of your dreams. What would it be?
Oh, I just want to be you. I just want to be you, really. Come on, you look like you've got the most fabulous life. I know the traveling is actually not great. It can be very, very, very tiring, right?
Well, it is. I mean, sometimes the champagne is non-vintage when you're flying, which I find very tiresome.
You fly economy.
Good God, no.
Are you not serious?
I try and avoid it.
Oh my word! Like, what have I done? Like, why am I being punished like this? Like, what have I done wrong? No, I would like to live. I would like to be like you, I think. Or, I mean, I would like to interview Elon Musk, although I don't think he's an easy interview, but I think he would be insightful. Donald Trump, I think he would be an interesting interview. I'd like to see the interplay between us. We'd probably have a hell of a row. As much as I say that, sort of these high-flying people, I actually like people who have pretty seemingly ordinary lives, actually, and their stories more than anybody else's.
It's interesting you say that, because I get asked regularly who was your all-time favorite guest, who was the greatest guest on the Dan Nicholl Show, and the expectation is it's going to be one of the really big names we've had on. It was Evander Holyfield, it was Ronan Keating, it was one of the big international stars. And I've had some great conversations with a lot of those people, but I often think of 3 people in particular. I think of Chris Burtish, who did the stand-up paddleboard crossing, who
Lovely guy.
so many people haven't heard of. He's got lots of things seriously wrong with him to even begin to think of doing that, and how he survived it is miraculous, but such a fascinating person and story. I think of Ron Rutland, the fat kid on the bike who cycled solo through all of Africa, having basically never gotten a bicycle before, and took 2.5 years to get to London, and then cycled through Asia and cycled around the world, and has met wonderful people. And he's just a rugby player who likes to drink beer and ride bicycles and meet people, and is as blue collar and down to earth as they come. And I think of Grant Lottering, who we had on the show very recently, who was famously dead after a cycling crash, got revived, and now we're travels the world cycling and inspiring people. And these are all the kind of everyday people. And I think when you can watch or listen to people with whom you can identify, you can imagine I could be around a braai with that person, or I could be having a beer with that person. Because of that identification process, it makes the interaction they then have with that guest a lot more real and a lot more intimate. And those are some of my best memories from guests that I've had.
I think the common theme from all those people, from what you're describing, is they have an authenticity about them. And that's quite rare and exceptionally refreshing. I certainly think so anyway. And that makes a good interview, doesn't it?
It does indeed, which sums up rather neatly exactly what we have just had.
Were you dying to wrap up? You were looking for a seg, thinking, oh God, when can I shut this one?
How do I get out of this interview? You're listening to the Annika Larsen show,
Sorry.
in which Dan Nicholl is a guest this week. And this has been edited down to just 4 hours. We've now been in studio for 2 days. Brad is weeping, the producer.
Is Brad's name really Brad?
I've got no idea.
Brad, what's
I
your
found
real
it.
name?
I found him on the internet, and
He's such a good-natured guy. So we have to finish now.
well, we do so with 2 riders. One is that it doesn't take us another 2 decades to catch up again.
Absolutely. No, that's true.
And the other is to come back onto the show soon, because I think there is so much more we can chat to you about, and I think there are going to be so many more cool adventures that you have to come, and it's just been an absolute treat having you on the show.
Oh, thank you, Dan. You're a very gracious and generous host, and I'm very, very pleased to be here.
And it leaves me just to congratulate you, and it is the one thing I really have been waiting for, your amazing work playing Mickey Haller's assistant in The Lincoln Lawyer.
Oh, my word.
If you haven't watched The Lincoln Lawyer, go and Google this, and then Google a photo of Annika Larsen, and tell me that this is not the same person.
I've been told that before. I thought you were going to say the 2-second cameo I did in Homeland, where I was made to look like a Texan newsreader, which I'd rather people didn't go and watch. So I'll take that as a compliment.
I am
Thank you.
straight off to Google that and then put it on every social media
Terrible.
platform I
She's
know.
terrible.
Annika Larsen, keep telling amazing stories, keep telling them the way that you do, and by the time we next meet, let's sort out that wine problem and
Working
ensure
on it.
you're back on track.
Thank you, Dan.
You're listening to The Dan Nicholl Show.